It's strange, the way peace can shatter in an instant. One moment your world is quiet, just the soft hum of sprinklers, the clink of a coffee cup, the sun stretching across perfectly trimmed lawns. And then before you even understand what's happening, that peace is gone. Torn apart by sirens, flashing lights, and the kind of chaos no one ever thinks could happen in their own neighborhood. When I saw my car, my Dodge Challenger, spinning across live television, chased by half the police department and a helicopter overhead, I didn't feel shock. Not at first. It was something colder, deeper. A sinking weight that told me this wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. It was personal. Because behind that steering wheel wasn't a stranger. It was someone I knew. Someone whose mother had spent months trying to make my life miserable. The self-appointed queen of our HOA, Karen. The same Karen who once threatened to fine me for parking too close to my own driveway. The same woman who smiled through her teeth while sending out community violation notices like wedding invitations. But even I couldn't have imagined this. Her teenage son, behind the wheel of my car, flying down the freeway with the whole city watching. That day didn't just destroy a car. It cracked open something rotten that had been festering under the surface of our perfect little community for years. The rules, the secrets, the lies we all agreed to ignore because it was easier than asking questions. And once the cameras turned off and the smoke cleared, those secrets didn't stay buried. They crawled out into the daylight, dragging every name, every sin, right along with them. People like to say neighborhoods like ours are safe, orderly, built on trust and respect. But that's the thing about appearances. They're just fences. Fences meant to keep the truth out. Or maybe to keep it in. And the night my car disappeared, I stopped wondering which side of that fence I was really on, because what started as a theft was about to uncover something much bigger. Something that would tear our neighborhood apart piece by piece. So tell me, how far would you go to protect your peace? When I first moved into Maple Grove Estates, I thought I'd found the dream. You know the kind of place? Manicured lawns stretching like green velvet, mailboxes that matched down to the screw, and neighbors who smiled a little too wide when they waved. It was the kind of community where the air always smelled faintly of fresh mulch and money, where HOA newsletters arrived like commandments from above. Everything looked perfect, too perfect. My house sat on the corner lot at the end of Oak Ridge Lane, a 2-story brick home with white shutters and a 3-car garage that gleamed under the afternoon sun. The crown jewel, though, wasn't the house. It was the car. My 2018 Dodge Challenger, black, polished, and loud enough to make the windows tremble when it started. I'd named her the Black Beast. Every inch of her was earned. 3 jobs, countless late nights, and years of telling myself that someday it'd all be worth it. And standing there, watching that sunlight roll across the hood, I believed it was. In Maple Grove, image was currency. You didn't just live there, you performed. The grass had to be exactly 2.5 inches high. Your trash cans couldn't be visible for more than 18 minutes after pickup, and heaven forbid your mailbox flag was crooked. The HOA wasn't just a group, it was an institution, and at its head was Karen Whitmore. Karen was everything you imagined an HOA president would be. Perfectly coiffed blonde bob, pastel cardigans, and an expression permanently frozen somewhere between judgment and self-satisfaction. She'd been president for 5 years, ever since her husband left, and she found purpose in controlling other people's lives. Her clipboard was her weapon, her power absolute. She spoke in smiles that didn't reach her eyes, and sentences that always began with, according to Section 4, Paragraph 3. Then there was Jim, the treasurer, retired accountant, divorced twice, and a man who measured his self-worth in HOA bylaws. If Karen was the queen, Jim was her loyal knight, scribbling notes at every meeting, ready to pounce on anyone who dared question authority. And Marlene, secretary, who claimed to be neutral, but somehow always managed to vote the same way Karen did. The 3 of them ruled Maple Grove like a suburban monarchy. My first real encounter with Karen happened 2 weeks after I moved in. I was waxing the Challenger in the driveway, music playing low, the sun setting behind the rooftops. She appeared like she'd been summoned, clipboard in hand, smile sharp as glass. "Lovely car," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Quite bold for this neighborhood." "Thanks," I said, not looking up. She stepped closer. "Just a friendly reminder, the HOA guidelines discourage aggressive vehicle modifications. You might want to review Section 9. I bit back a laugh. "I'll keep that in mind." That was her way of saying I didn't fit. That my car, loud, unapologetic, and impossible to ignore, didn't belong among the hybrids and beige SUVs. But I didn't care. I'd worked too hard to dim my shine just to make someone like her comfortable. At first, I tried to play along, attended the meetings, smiled through her lectures, pretended to care about paint shades and fence heights. The meetings were always the same. A circle of folding chairs in the community center, the smell of burned coffee in the air, and Karen perched at the front like a preacher, preaching order and uniformity. The others nodded, murmuring approval, terrified of being next on her list. I learned quickly how things worked in Maple Grove. Power wasn't about rules. It was about perception. If Karen didn't like you, the community didn't either. Complaints would appear out of nowhere. Noise violations, landscaping concerns, anonymous reports. All subtle ways of saying, "You don't belong here." The first notice came a month later. A printed letter slipped under my door. "Unauthorized vehicle display in driveway." I stared at it, confused, until I realized they meant the Challenger. It wasn't parked on the grass, wasn't blocking the sidewalk. It was just there, shining, proud, and apparently offensive to Karen's sense of order. I let it go. A warning, I thought, a test. But then came the next one. Exterior lighting not in compliance. Then another. Lawn edging inconsistent with neighborhood standard. Each one more ridiculous than the last. I could have fought it. Could have gone to the board. But I didn't want to start a war over paperwork. At least, not yet. Then there was Tyler, Karen's son. 17, lanky, with a perpetual scowl that made him look older than he was. He'd cruise around the neighborhood on his skateboard, earbuds in, pretending he didn't hear when people said hello. The kind of kid who was born into privilege but didn't know what to do with it. I saw him a few times eyeing my car, running his fingers along the hood when he thought I wasn't looking. I'd joke, "Careful, that paint job costs more than your sneakers." He'd smirk and disappear down the street. There were whispers about him, trouble at school, fights, late-night police visits. But in Maple Grove, gossip was currency, and truth was optional. Whenever someone brought him up, Karen would deflect with a tight smile and a line about teenage rebellion. Still, there were cracks showing. Small things that didn't make sense. Like the time I found tire tracks near my mailbox at midnight, deep enough to suggest someone had peeled out fast. Or when I noticed my garden gate left open, though I always locked it. Once I came home to find my side mirror slightly cracked. No note, no explanation. Coincidences, I told myself, just bad luck. But then came the look. One evening, as I parked the Challenger and stepped out, I caught Karen standing on her porch, watching me. Not smiling this time, just watching, her eyes cold, her arms crossed. For a split second, I thought I saw something in her expression. Not disapproval, but fear. And just as quickly, it was gone. Life in Maple Grove had a rhythm. Morning joggers, afternoon deliveries, evening sprinklers. It was predictable, safe. At least, that's what we told ourselves. But underneath that safety was something brittle, something waiting to crack. The HOA was tightening its grip, introducing new rules almost weekly. No overnight parking on the street. No exterior holiday lights before December 1st. No garage work past 6 p.m. It was suffocating, but no one dared push back, except me. When they issued a written warning about mechanical activity in open view, because I was changing my own oil in the driveway, I decided I'd had enough. I started showing up to meetings again, not as a polite listener, but as a problem. I asked questions. I pointed out contradictions. I even quoted their own bylaws back at them. Jim didn't like that. Neither did Karen. The tension grew thick, visible. Neighbors who used to wave began avoiding eye contact. I was becoming that guy, the one who wouldn't fall in line, the one who threatened the illusion of control. Then, one morning, I woke up to find a small crack in my windshield, perfectly centered. Clean, deliberate. Not an accident. My stomach dropped. I knew what it was, a warning. I confronted Karen that afternoon. She stood at her porch pretending to check her rose bushes. "Someone vandalized my car," I said. She didn't look up. "That's unfortunate," she said flatly. "But perhaps you should consider parking it in your garage. Out of sight, out of mind." Her words dripped with implication. Out of sight, out of mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her tone, her smile, the way she always seemed to know just enough about everyone's lives to make threats sound like suggestions. But here's the thing about control. It makes people sloppy. They start to believe they're untouchable. And that's when they make mistakes. Karen's mistake came disguised as confidence. A smug smile at the next meeting. A comment about how certain residents need to remember their place. The way she laughed when I brought up the vandalism. I could feel it building. Pressure, resentment, the sense that something was about to break. The notices stopped coming, which somehow felt worse. It wasn't peace. It was silence before the storm. Tyler, meanwhile, was spiraling. I'd catch him lurking around the block late at night, sometimes with a group of older kids in beat-up cars. Once I heard shouting from Karen's house, loud enough for half the street to hear. She tried to laugh it off the next day, but her eyes told another story. And then there was the key moment, the one I didn't realize mattered until later. Tyler stopped me one afternoon, said he liked my car, asked how fast it could go. I told him, "Fast enough to get you in trouble." He laughed, but there was something behind it. Desperation. Like he was already in trouble, and speed was the only way out. I thought nothing of it then. Just small talk. But a week later, when I saw Karen pacing on her porch at sunrise, phone pressed to her ear, whispering urgently into the receiver, I knew something was off. The following days felt tense, electric, like the air before a thunderstorm. Neighbors acted strange. Hushed conversations on sidewalks, glances exchanged over hedges. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then came that Saturday morning. Clear skies, perfect silence. The kind of day that tricks you into thinking nothing bad could possibly happen. Coffee in hand, I stepped outside and looked at the Challenger. The sun caught the black paint just right, and for a brief second, everything felt perfect again. Like maybe somehow peace had returned. But peace is fragile in places like Maple Grove. It's not built on trust. It's built on fear. And fear has a funny way of showing up when you least expect it. What I didn't know then was that the moment I stepped back inside my house to grab lunch, the countdown had already begun. 15 minutes later, my engine roared to life. But I wasn't the one behind the wheel, and as I sprinted out the door, heart pounding, realizing my car was gone, I had no idea this wasn't just the beginning of chaos. It was the unraveling of everything Maple Grove pretended to be. Because once the mask slips in a neighborhood like ours, you can never put it back on. It started with a letter, a single sheet of paper tucked neatly into my mailbox, printed in that same officious font the HOA seemed to love. Notice of noncompliance. The words burned into my mind as I read the rest. My offense? Improper vehicle parking orientation. Apparently, my Challenger faced the wrong direction in the driveway. The rules, it claimed, required all vehicles to be parked facing outward for uniform community appearance. I actually laughed when I read it, out loud, because how could anyone possibly care which direction a car was parked? But the laughter didn't last long. 2 days later came the fine, $75. Due immediately, and a warning that further violations may result in additional penalties or legal action. Legal action. For parking direction. That was my first real taste of how far they were willing to go. I paid it, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want the fight. Not yet. But the truth was, I could feel it. The tension, building, quiet but constant, like a storm forming miles away. Then, like clockwork, came another notice. This time for unsanctioned exterior decoration. The culprit? A small flag I'd placed in my flower bed. Black with a silver stripe, a subtle tribute to veterans. I wasn't a veteran myself, but my dad was, and it was a simple gesture of respect. Apparently, it violated aesthetic cohesion. That one I didn't pay. 2 days later, a board member named Jim appeared at my door, clipboard in hand, his expression somewhere between smug and satisfied. "Just trying to keep the neighborhood beautiful," he said. Karen asked me to swing by personally. That's when I realized it wasn't about the flag. It was about me. The next week, they cited me for lawn inconsistency. My grass, according to their measurements, was 1 inch too long. I hadn't mowed because it had rained for 3 days straight. I even explained that, politely, calmly, in an email. Their response came the next morning. Failure to maintain community landscaping standards will result in further disciplinary action. It became routine. Every morning I'd check my mailbox and find a new envelope. Some days, too. Every violation more absurd than the last. Fines for leaving my trash cans out 20 minutes too long. Fines for washing my car in the driveway. Fines for having unapproved exterior lighting. They were suffocating me in paperwork, and for a while, it worked. I started watching everything I did. How long the sprinklers ran, where I parked, how loud the garage door sounded at night. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next blow. But the breaking point came from something small. So small it almost felt ridiculous. It was early morning, quiet still, dew on the grass. I stepped outside to grab the paper and noticed Karen standing across the street. Clipboard, of course. She wasn't pretending this time. She was taking photos of my house. "My mailbox, my car, every angle. What are you doing?" I asked. She smiled without lowering her phone. "Documenting violations? For what?" Her tone was syrupy, like she was talking to a child. "For your file. That's when I lost it." "You're harassing me, Karen. You know that, right?" Her smile didn't move. "I'm enforcing the standards you agreed to when you moved here." Then she turned and walked away. I stood there on the driveway, watching her go, and for the first time since moving in, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control, about breaking me down until I either submitted or left, and she was winning. The neighborhood began to change, too. Where once there had been polite waves, there was now avoidance. Conversation stopped when I walked by. I caught glimpses of neighbors whispering over fences, glancing toward my house. I'd become the problem. It got worse when I tried to fight back. I started showing up to HOA meetings again, this time with a folder full of their nonsense letters. I read them aloud, one by one, in front of the board. Some of the other homeowners laughed at first, realizing how absurd it all was. But Karen just sat there unflinching, that tight-lipped smile, never wavering. When I finished, she said, "If you feel our standards are unreasonable, perhaps Maple Grove isn't the right fit for you." That line hit harder than I expected, not because of what she said, but because of how the others reacted. They didn't defend me, didn't say a word, just stared down at their hands, afraid to pick a side. And that's when I understood the HOA wasn't just rules on paper. It was fear made into policy. After that meeting, things escalated fast. I started getting anonymous complaints. Apparently, I was revving my engine late at night, driving recklessly, disturbing the peace. None of it true. But the letters piled up. And then one day, I got a call from the local police. A noise complaint. At 10 p.m., when they arrived, my car hadn't moved in hours. The officer apologized, said they had to follow up because the HOA reported an ongoing issue. He even looked embarrassed, but I knew who it was, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized Karen was using the system against me. Every call, every report, every rule, it wasn't random. It was strategy. Paper trails, witnesses, patterns. She was trying to make me look like a nuisance, to build a case, to have me fined, maybe even removed. But she didn't stop there. A few weeks later, I noticed tire marks across my lawn. At first, I thought maybe kids had cut across. But then I found something else. A small dent in the side of my mailbox. Deliberate. Someone had hit it. I checked my security camera, but the footage was blank. The feed had gone black around 1 a.m. I looked closer and realized the wires had been cut. That night, I sat awake in the dark, the Challenger parked in the garage, every sound outside making me tense. The next morning, Karen waved as she watered her roses. "Rough night?" she said sweetly. Her eyes said everything she didn't. The following week, a new rule appeared in the HOA bulletin. Garage doors must remain closed when not in use. It didn't seem like much odd until I realized I'd been the only one. With my garage door open that day, then came the landscaping issue. I'd planted a few shrubs along the side of the house. Nothing dramatic, just to add some privacy. 2 days later, I got another notice. Unapproved vegetation placement. Must be removed within 72 hours. That one broke something in me. I walked outside, looked at those small green shrubs, and for a moment I considered ripping them out just to avoid another fight. But then I saw Karen standing across the street again, watching, smiling, and I didn't touch them. 3 days later, an HOA contractor showed up unannounced. I watched from my window as they dug the shrubs out of the soil, loaded them into a truck, and drove off. I stormed outside, furious, demanding to know who gave permission. The man just shrugged. Work order from the board. That night, I filed a formal complaint. The next morning, I got a response. Per your signed HOA agreement, all decisions made by the board regarding landscaping are final. They'd boxed me in completely. Meanwhile, rumors spread like wildfire. That I was uncooperative, hostile, endangering the peace of the neighborhood. The same people who once borrowed my tools now crossed the street to avoid me. Even my neighbor Dave, the one who'd first told me about Tyler, started keeping his distance. When I asked him why, he just said quietly, "You don't want to make enemies here, man." But I already had. The weirdest part was how calm Karen stayed through it all. She never yelled, never raised her voice. Just smiled and let the rules do her dirty work. It was psychological warfare wrapped in professionalism. Then something strange started happening. Tyler, her son, began showing up more often near my property, sitting on the curb, staring at the Challenger. One night I caught him leaning against it, running his fingers over the hood, like it belonged to him. "Hey," I called out. "Step away from the car." He didn't move at first, just looked up at me with this hollow stare. Then, without a word, he walked off into the dark. It rattled me. A few days later, Karen showed up at my door. "I heard there was an incident," she said, "with my son." I told her what happened. She sighed, dramatic and exhausted. "He's been struggling lately," she said, "but I'd appreciate if you didn't make things worse by confronting him. Teenagers can be unpredictable. That word stuck with me. After she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was brewing. The way she'd said it wasn't casual. It was a warning. Sure enough, 2 nights later, someone egged my house. Not just a few, dozens dripping down my windows, splattering the garage. The next morning, as I was hosing it off, Karen walked by with her dog. "Vandalism?" she asked. "You really should install better security cameras." I stared at her, water still spraying from the hose, and realized she was enjoying this. Every moment of it. That's when I stopped trying to play defense. I started collecting everything: emails, letters, photos, timestamps. I documented every petty fine, every false claim, every unexplained incident. I found out something else, too. The HOA wasn't just targeting me. They'd done this before, to another homeowner 2 streets over who'd tried to build a fence without approval. The man ended up selling his house and moving within 6 months. Karen had called it a peaceful resolution. I began talking quietly with a few others, neighbors who were tired of the rules, of the intimidation. Most were too scared to speak up, but one older couple, the Wilsons, shared something shocking. They'd discovered that Karen had been approving neighborhood contracts through a landscaping company, one that her cousin owned. Inflated prices, fake maintenance schedules. It was small-scale corruption, but in a community like Maple Grove, it added up to thousands. I knew I couldn't take her down head-on. Not yet. But I could wait, watch, gather proof. And all the while, the tension kept rising. Tyler became more erratic. Loud music at night. Burnouts at the cul-de-sac. The police started showing up more often. Every time, Karen smoothed it over, calling in favors, keeping his record spotless. But one night, I saw him arguing with her in the driveway, shouting, waving his arms. "I said I'll fix it," he yelled before storming off on his skateboard. "Fix what?" A week later, I'd find out. It was a Saturday, clear skies, sunlight glinting off the hood of my Challenger. I'd spent the morning detailing it, the smell of wax in the air, the quiet hum of sprinklers in the distance. Karen had passed by earlier, said nothing, just gave me that tight smile again. I went inside for lunch, 15 minutes tops. When I came back out, the driveway was empty. At first, I thought maybe it had been towed, maybe another HOA stunt. But then I heard it. The roar of an engine, my engine, somewhere in the distance. I ran to the street. Nothing. Just the fading echo of that unmistakable sound. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Dave, "Turn on the news." And when I did, there it was. Live footage from a helicopter. A black Dodge Challenger speeding down the interstate, weaving through traffic. My license plate shining bright under the midday sun. The reporter's voice was urgent. "We're being told the driver may be a local resident, possibly a minor." My stomach dropped. Because deep down, I already knew who was behind the wheel. Tyler, Karen's perfect son. And as the camera zoomed in on the chase, my hands trembled, not from fear but from something else. Because somehow in this perfect little neighborhood, in this kingdom of control and rules and fake smiles, everything was finally spiraling out of her hands. The board couldn't find their way out of this. The Queen of Maple Grove was about to lose her crown, and the key fallout was going to shake every picket fence on the block. By the time the Challenger crashed, Maple Grove wasn't just shaken, it was cracked open. Every whisper, every rumor, every unspoken truth that had been festering beneath the surface came spilling out like oil from a ruptured pipe. The news cameras stayed for days. A stolen car chase ending in a fiery wreck, and the vehicle registered to me, not the driver, gave the HOA everything it thought it needed. Karen moved fast. The very next morning, while the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline still lingered in the air, I received a letter on official letterhead. Notice of community endangerment. Emergency hearing scheduled for Monday, 6 p.m. They were going to make an example out of me. The irony was almost beautiful. I was being accused of endangering the community after her son had stolen my car and nearly killed someone. But Karen wasn't just a rule enforcer. She was a strategist. She understood that perception was everything. And in Maple Grove, where image was law, she controlled the narrative. The rumor spread like wildfire. I had left my keys in the car. I had given Tyler permission to drive it. Some even whispered that I'd been the one behind the wheel, and the minor story was a cover-up. The board didn't correct a single rumor, they let them grow. By the day of the hearing, my reputation was already shredded. It started at sunset. The community center glowed with that artificial amber light that makes everything look slightly unreal. The parking lot was packed, neighbors standing in small, tense clusters, pretending they weren't waiting for the night's entertainment. When I walked in, the room went silent. Karen sat at the head of the long table. The other board members lined up like obedient soldiers beside her. Her expression was calm, controlled, but her eyes, sharp and narrow, were alive with satisfaction. "Thank you for joining us," she said, as though I'd been invited to dinner instead of a trial. I sat down at the small table opposite them. The air was heavy with anticipation, thick enough to choke on. "We're here," she continued, "to discuss multiple incidents of misconduct, noncompliance, and reckless behavior endangering the Maple Grove community. Do you have anything you'd like to say before we begin?" I looked at her, the perfect posture, the manicured nails, the faint glint of her gold necklace reflecting the fluorescent light, and I almost laughed, because she actually believed she still had control of this. I placed a folder on the table. "Yeah," I said. "I've got a few things," she smiled thinly. "Of course," she launched into her speech. It was rehearsed, polished, a symphony of accusations wrapped in bureaucratic jargon. She listed every violation, every disturbance, every fabricated complaint. She painted me as the neighborhood menace, the lone troublemaker who refused to respect the collective peace. When she got to the part about the car, her voice softened, the tone of someone pretending to be regretful. "Tragically," she said, "this incident could have been prevented if community members followed proper safety protocols. Leaving keys unattended, failing to secure one's property. Stop." The word cut through the air like a blade. Every head in the room turned toward me. "You're not going to stand there," I said slowly. And blame me for what your son did." Karen blinked, caught off guard for the first time. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Tyler stole my car. He crashed it. He nearly killed someone. And you're sitting here trying to turn it into a neighborhood policy issue?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. For a moment, the mask slipped, just a flicker of panic in her eyes, before she composed herself again. "That's an unsubstantiated claim. Tyler wasn't charged with theft because you covered it up," I said. My voice was calm, but my pulse thundered in my ears. "You called in favors. You made sure the police report disappeared before anyone could read it. But I've got something better than the report." I opened the folder. Inside was a USB drive, a stack of printed emails, and a few photographs, each one carefully labeled, each time stamped. "See," I continued, "you made a mistake. Karen, you thought cutting my security camera wires was enough, but I replaced them, quietly, different system. Remote backups." The room went dead silent. I plugged the USB into the projector and hit play. The screen flickered. Static, then clarity. It was the night of the theft. Tyler, hood up, creeping across my driveway. He paused, looked around, then opened the Challenger's door. He got in. The engine roared to life. Then, and this was the part that made my hands tremble, the footage switched to a different angle. Karen standing at the end of her driveway, arms crossed, watching him go. She didn't stop him, didn't call out. Just stood there until the taillights disappeared. The crowd erupted. Voices, gasps, murmurs. The other board members turned to look at her, eyes wide. Karen's face went pale, not with guilt but fury. "This is a violation of privacy," she snapped. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said. "It's my property, my security footage, and before you start screaming about legality, I've already submitted copies to the police, the insurance company, and the HOA's Regional Oversight Office." That got her. She froze, truly froze, for the first time. "And that's not all," I continued. I slid a set of emails across the table. Correspondence between Karen and her cousin, the owner of the landscaping company, dates, invoices, and bank transfers. Inflated contracts, kickbacks disguised as maintenance fees, thousands skimmed off the community budget every year. You've been lining your pockets while threatening people over mailbox colors. The other board members began whispering frantically. One of them, a balding man named Phil, leaned over, hissing something to another woman beside him. Karen tried to regain control. "These are doctored documents, lies. I don't know how you—" "Save it," I said. "You know what's funny? You've spent years making everyone afraid of you, but you forgot what fear looks like when it's aimed back at you." She stood, voice rising. "This meeting is over." "No," I said quietly. "It's not," because that's when the door opened, and in walked Officer Daniels, the same cop who'd come by weeks earlier about the false noise complaint. Behind him were two more officers. He nodded toward me, then toward Karen. "Mrs. Carter," he said evenly, "we need to speak with you about an ongoing investigation regarding fraud, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice." For a second, she just stood there, speechless, blinking, her world collapsing in real time. "This is outrageous," she stammered. "You can't—" But Daniels was already reading her rights. The room erupted again, phones out, people recording, whispers turning into shouts. The same neighbors who'd avoided eye contact for months were now standing on chairs, craning for a better view. Karen's voice cracked as they escorted her toward the door. "You think this changes anything?" she shouted. "You'll regret this. You all will." But no one followed her. No one defended her. And just like that, she was gone. The silence that followed was surreal. The board members sat frozen, unsure whether to adjourn or flee. The neighbors slowly turned toward me, the man they'd called the problem, the troublemaker, the rule breaker. For the first time, none of them looked angry. They looked ashamed. The next few days were chaos. The story spread beyond Maple Grove, local papers, then regional news. HOA president arrested in fraud scheme. Suburban power struggle turns criminal. Reporters parked at the neighborhood entrance. Residents who'd once bragged about living here now ducked behind curtains, But the real chaos came from within. With Karen gone, the HOA was paralyzed. The vice president resigned the same night. The treasurer, Phil, tried to quietly delete files, but the oversight committee seized their records before he could. A full audit was launched, and every buried secret started crawling back into the light. For the first time, people started talking to each other again, openly, nervously, like prisoners just realizing the gate was open. Stories poured out. Intimidation tactics, anonymous complaints, threats of foreclosure for trivial things. It was like a dam breaking. I didn't even have to lead the charge. The neighbors who'd once glared at me were now the ones demanding reform. The Wilsons printed flyers for an emergency election. Dave, the guy who'd once told me to stay, quiet, showed up at my door one morning with coffee and an apology. "You were right," he said simply. "We were scared. She made us scared." "I know," I said. "She did that to everyone." The HOA met again 2 weeks later, this time under temporary oversight from the county. The same community center, but a completely different atmosphere. No more fear, no more whispering. People spoke, really spoke. When it was my turn, I stood up and looked around the room, at faces I'd once dreaded seeing through my blinds. "Look," I said, "I'm not here to tear this place apart. I moved here because I wanted what everyone else did. Peace, a place that felt like home, but somewhere along the way that turned into control, into punishment, and we all let it happen because we thought the rules were supposed to keep us safe." I paused, letting that hang in the air. But rules without fairness aren't protection. They're weapons. There was silence, deep, reflective silence, before people started nodding. When the votes were counted, the entire board was dissolved. A new committee was formed, smaller, transparent, open to residents. Fines were suspended pending review. And for the first time since moving in, I walked out of that meeting feeling like the neighborhood actually belonged to the people who lived in it. Later that night, as I stood in my driveway, I could still hear the faint hum of laughter from a few doors down. Kids on bikes again, porch lights on, normalcy creeping back in, fragile but real. The Challenger was gone, totaled beyond repair. But in its place was something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Then, as I turned to head inside, a car I didn't recognize slowed in front of my house. The window rolled down. A young man's face appeared, pale, haunted. Tyler. He looked older, or maybe just broken. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he said quietly. I didn't answer. She said you were dangerous, that she was protecting me." I just stared at him, the weight of everything pressing down between us. His mother's lies, the chaos, the months of torment. "Finally," I said, "you get to choose who you become after this." "She didn't." He nodded slowly, eyes wet, then drove off into the night. For a long time, I stood there, the streetlights stretching long shadows across the pavement. The HOA signs were still up, weathered now, streaked from rain. But they didn't mean what they used to. Because for the first time, Maple Grove wasn't afraid anymore. And maybe that's the real ending. Not the arrests or the headlines or the votes, but the quiet after the storm. The moment the neighborhood stopped being ruled and started being lived in. People like Karen thrive on silence, on obedience, on fear. But when you stand up, when you pull back the curtain and let everyone see what's been hiding behind it, you take that power away. And sometimes that's all it takes to end a reign. One person refusing to be afraid anymore. So tell me, what would you have done if it were your home, your peace, your life they tried to take from you? Would you have paid the fine? Or fought the queen of the cul-de-sac until her empire crumbled? It didn't happen all at once. Change never does. It came in fragments, whispered apologies, unexpected knocks at the door, small gestures that hinted at guilt and redemption. Maple Grove had been a kingdom of silence under Karen's reign. But after that night, when the board dissolved and the truth finally clawed its way into daylight, silence turned into something new. It wasn't fear anymore, it was reflection. For weeks, the neighborhood buzzed with the aftermath. News vans lingered for a while, hungry for new angles. Suburban HOA president charged in multi-year fraud scandal. Community revolts against its own board. There was something almost poetic about watching Karen's face, once the symbol of authority and artificial perfection, now framed by courthouse steps and microphones. The same woman who'd used the HOA as her personal weapon was now the headline of its downfall. At first I thought seeing her like that would bring me satisfaction. I thought I'd feel some kind of righteous triumph. But when they showed her being led into the courtroom, chin trembling, eyes hollow, I didn't feel power. I felt closure. A quiet, heavy kind. The kind that doesn't celebrate, but exhales. The county prosecutors built a solid case. The fraud was deeper than anyone imagined. Inflated maintenance contracts, unreported community funds, and even personal reimbursements disguised as landscaping improvements. Turns out Karen had been bleeding the HOA dry for years, and the board had either been too complicit or too cowardly to stop her. Phil, the treasurer, took a plea deal, 2 years probation and a fine. The others scattered, resigning, moving away, pretending they'd been victims too. But Karen didn't get that luxury. Her trial stretched on for months. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Maple Grove let out a collective sigh. Not cheers, not applause, just relief. The day after sentencing, her house went up for sale. A for sale sign stood crooked in the front yard, where she used to post HOA warnings about untrimmed hedges and trash can violations. People avoided the place like it carried a curse. For a while it did. The Queen's Castle, stripped bare and waiting for the next chapter. But for me, the aftermath wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding what was left. Insurance handled most of the car mess, though no payout could ever replace the Challenger, the Black Beast. I replaced her, sure. Got a newer model, sleeker. But she didn't carry the same fire. She was a reminder that control can vanish in an instant, that pride can become vulnerability in a heartbeat. My driveway used to be a symbol of defiance, the shiny muscle car that rubbed against the HOA's polished uniformity. Now it was a symbol of freedom, a reminder that I'd survived every tactic, every letter, every smug smirk they threw my way. The real change, though, wasn't about property. It was about people. It started small. Dave, my once skeptical neighbor, came over one afternoon with a rake and a six-pack. He didn't say much, just started helping me clear the fallen leaves off the lawn. That's how things began to heal, quietly, through actions, not apologies. The Wilsons next door started hosting Friday night dinners, open to anyone in the community. The same cul-de-sac that once felt like a battlefield was now filled with laughter, music, the smell of barbecue. The fences that had divided us, figuratively and literally, began to come down. People started waving again. Conversations returned. For the first time, Maple Grove felt alive, not just manicured. The new HOA, if you could even call it that, was nothing like the old one. It wasn't a power structure anymore. It was a community council, transparent, voluntary, neighbor-run. Decisions were made out in the open. No secret meetings, no anonymous complaints. Just people talking, hashing things out, listening. The bylaws got rewritten too. Every one of Karen's control mechanisms was stripped out. The decor uniformity rules, the noise ordinances that had been weaponized, the excessive fine system. What was left was lean, simple, fair. I didn't run for any position. I didn't want a title. I'd already fought my battle. My role now was something quieter, being the reminder of what happens when people stop paying attention. But peace is a funny thing. It's not loud, not cinematic. It's morning coffee on the porch without looking over your shoulder. It's hearing kids' laughter and not sirens. It's mowing the lawn because you want to, not because a notice told you to. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The scorch marks from the crash faded, washed away by rain and time. But I still saw them when I walked by the park, faint ghosts of tire rubber and chaos. Sometimes I'd stop there and just listen. Birds, wind, the hum of distant traffic, life continuing. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. A car pulled up near the park, a silver sedan with tinted windows. For a moment, I thought it was just another visitor. But when the door opened, I recognized him instantly. Tyler. He looked older, not just in years, but in weight. The kind that comes from carrying guilt you can't drop. He'd cut his hair short, dressed plain, clean. There was something fragile about the way he walked toward me, like each step was an apology waiting to happen. "Hey," he said softly. I didn't answer right away. The last time I saw him, he was being handcuffed beside the wreck of my car. I heard she got sentenced, he said, eyes darting to the ground. I didn't go to the hearing. Couldn't. Silence stretched between us. I just wanted to say. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry. For everything. The car, the lies. All of it. I thought I was fixing something, but I just made it worse. You didn't deserve that. For a long time, I just looked at him. The kid who had turned my life upside down. The son of the woman who had nearly destroyed an entire community. But in that moment, I didn't see a criminal. I saw someone who had finally learned what accountability feels like. I know, I said quietly. He nodded, relief breaking through the tension. I'm trying to start over, he said. Different town. Working part-time at a garage. That's good, I said. Fixing cars instead of stealing them. That's a good start. He cracked a small, genuine smile. Then he looked toward the park near the spot where it all ended, and said, You still think about it? Every time I hear an engine, I said. He nodded like he understood, then turned to leave. As his car pulled away, I realized something. The noise, that deep, guttural sound of the Challenger that used to represent rebellion, defiance, power, didn't trigger anger anymore. It just sounded like closure. The neighborhood was different now. You could feel it in the air, a shift from hostility to humility. People weren't afraid to speak up anymore. When something needed fixing, they didn't whisper behind curtains or send anonymous complaints. They talked, out loud, together, and yet for all the progress, remnants of the old Maple Grove lingered, reminders of how easily control can masquerade as order. A few months after Karen's sentencing, a developer came sniffing around, offering to revitalize the community with a new management company. The residents held a meeting. For the first time, everyone showed up, not out of fear, but solidarity. When the proposal was read aloud, the crowd erupted. Voices rose, not in chaos, but conviction. They refused, flat out. No outside control. No returning to the old ways. That was the moment I realized Maple Grove had finally learned. We'd all been victims of her power, not just through fines and threats, but through the illusion that we couldn't live without the rules. But now we'd seen the truth. We didn't need control to have peace. We just needed trust. And maybe, just maybe, that's what community actually means. Not uniformity, but understanding. Not perfection, but progress. Sometimes I drive the new Challenger through the neighborhood late at night. Windows down, engine rumbling low. The street lights cast long golden streaks across the pavement, and the air smells like cut grass and rain. I pass the old HOA office, now converted into a community library. I pass Karen's old house, now painted a cheerful yellow. By the new family who moved in, the sound of kids, laughing spilling out from the backyard. It's strange how quickly something oppressive can turn into something ordinary. Once the fear is gone, every once in a while, I'll still get a letter. Not an HOA warning this time, but a thank you card. From a neighbor. From someone who remembered what it felt like to be powerless and decided never to be again. The media eventually moved on, chasing the next scandal, the next suburban nightmare. But here, in Maple Grove, life kept rebuilding. One conversation, one cookout, one handshake at a time. I don't know if what I did counts as revenge. Maybe it started that way, fueled by anger, by pride. But in the end, it became something else, something cleaner. Revenge burns hot but quick. Justice. Justice rebuilds what's left, and I didn't just get justice for myself. I got it for everyone who'd ever felt small under her shadow. Now, when I stand on my porch and look down the street, the same street